to another episode of Life at the Beggar's Tomb. Glad you could be here. I hope you're here by choice. I hope it's not your job to be here. It'd be kind of ironic if you're getting paid to watch this and I'm not getting paid to do it. But sometimes irony's funny like that. Yes, so I was thinking about putting your good foot forward. It's always sometimes clear that I'm not necessarily doing things in the right order. Well, it might seem like I'm not, but there's another saying to take things in stride, okay? And so then you got to pick what you're going to do. Are you always going to be worried about what foot you got forward? Or are you going to keep putting one foot in front of another and take things in stride as they come? Which is the better philosophy? Well, if you do things where you're always making sure you got your good foot forward, then say an employer or something might not see your bad foot and they might hire you. But if you're taking things in stride, well then they might have seen your bad foot and they're like, he's got that bad foot. But honesty's honesty, and at the end of the day, the truth will out, as they say. It'll come out one way or another. So I would rather to be pleasantly surprising for someone who thinks, I got the bad foot, and find out I got a good foot. So here I am taking things in stride, and this one is called The Tale of the Grateful Dead. Now, I should say, if I haven't already, that the foundation of all this, what opened up all this to me, was Jerry Garcia. Through discovering Jerry and his work linked to all these others. And one of the key things about Jerry was, along with his majestic ability to play guitar and powerful singing voice, and the ability to compose, and also to cooperate with other musicians and get the best out of them too. Along with all that is kindness. Now, Jerry is a kind person, and I think that everyone represented up here on these two tapestries is as well. But now to the tale of the Grateful Dead that we're going to get into. Now, this isn't a story all about the history of the Grateful Dead. How am I going to sit here and tell 30 years of history about the Grateful Dead? I'm not. That's not what this is about. Back in 1965, there was a band in California called the Warlocks. Well, the Warlocks were Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead. But they found out that there was a band that already had that name. And that band that already had the name had a little record out, which they weren't to that level yet. They were playing at a pizza place. But then they got offered a gig with Ken Kesey playing the Acid Test, which was going to put them in front of quite a few new people. And they realized that they better, if they're going to take themselves serious as a band, they needed to have a name that wasn't already taken. So Jerry pulled out a dictionary. I don't know what year it was. A dictionary. I think it was a Funkin' Wagnall's dictionary. I've heard before what year it was, but the numbers sometimes slip away if I don't write them down. I don't have that number written down, so I'm not going to try and state what year that dictionary was. But I know it was 1965 when this event took place, because the very first show they played with the Acid Test and Ken Kesey was the first show they played as the Grateful Dead. But the way they got the name was opened up that dictionary, and the words jumped off the page because they were opening up the dictionary to look for a name. Well, the words that they opened up to were the Grateful Dead, and they jumped right off the page, and that's how they got their name. So the tale of the Grateful Dead is referring to why the Grateful Dead was already in the dictionary before there was a band named that. Well, the truth is, it was an old folk tale. Now, the thing about folk tales, just like folk music, is it's not clear who the author is. It just comes from the people. Now, Woody had a great saying that it's all folk music because it's all made by folks. But the thing about a folk tale is the creator doesn't necessarily get credit for it. But the good thing about folk tales and folk songs is that they can be added to or taken away from if they don't necessarily belong to anybody. You're not hurting anybody's copyright. And the person that's going to put the time and effort and adding to it is probably going to be the person who deserves to be able to tell the tale. And in this case, well, I hope that you decide that it's the case, because here it goes. I'm going to tell it. Now, this tale hasn't been written down for a long time. Now, folk tales, another thing they have is adaptability. Like, the tale doesn't have to stay, and the song doesn't have to stay exactly the same, because the fact that it has adaptability allows it to stay fresh and new as time moves on. So here it is, serving it up fresh. There once lived a king, and he rose to power with wisdom and virtue. As he rose to power, he received added blessings of children. The queen gave birth to the first two rather early into his reign, and as time passed, the queen mourned for never having had a daughter, and although she had developed health ailments, she decided to have another child a full 10 years after the second son had been born. But as she developed her third child, as she delivered her third child, she became faint and slipped in unconsciousness. As the baby came forth into this world, the third son was born into this world without a mother, for the queen had died during the delivery. The king was brokenhearted and mourned deeply. As time passed, his only concern became his 3 sons, who he felt an added duty to make them happy, to make up for the lack of not having a mother. He was caring and devoted, but without the aid of the queen, his parenting was aimed mainly at appeasing their wishes, and he neglected to teach them discipline, patience, and gratitude. The youngest son, having never experienced the luxury of a mother, was less demanding, and therefore sometimes overlooked. Not only did he get less attention from the king, but he was bullied by his brothers. The older brothers were quite content to dwell in the castle well after they reached adulthood, and the king, not wanting to be abandoned, made no objection. The youngest son was now also reaching adulthood, and although the king had always told himself that when the older boys were grown, he would make up for lost time by focusing on the youngest, that was still yet to happen. Then one night the king was surprised by the presence of the angel of death, who came by his bed. He recognized the angel of death immediately, even though he'd never seen death eye to eye before. He instantly began pleading with death, but death, although never speaking a word, had a rebuttal for all the king argued. With just his cool, emotionless gaze, death put his stern reasoning into the mind of the king. The king recognized that death is always justified and comes to spare the world's inhabitants of added pain and suffering. The king mourned that he would not be leaving the kingdom into the hands of 2 sons who'd never learned compassion and generosity to the average person, and had general disregard towards peasants. The king himself knew that compassion, fairness, and generosity were some of his greatest assets in his rise to power, but he failed to impart these to his sons. How chilling the truth felt as it occurred to him that the son he'd neglected was better adjusted than the ones he'd spoiled with power. All of his thoughts ran through his mind in hyperspeed flash of fear until he fashioned a desperate plea for one last deed on earth before he departed to the next world. In his silent stare, death let it be known that this defiance of fate was of great risk, for thus far he had not committed any major sin worthy of being denied paradise until this rebellion against the angel of death. For love of his sons and remorse for his failures, the king couldn't resist taking the risk, and death departed, temporarily leaving the king to plot out one last decree toward his children. The king knew that the kingdom would soon rebel against his sons after he was departed and would overthrow them. He also knew that the older son would be brutal and oppressive to the youngest. The next morning, he gathered all the gold of his treasury, and he separated it into 3 equal bags. He spoke to his youngest son first, and with tearful apology, he explained that his time had come and he failed as a father. He told the boy that he had only one hope for a good future, and that would be to leave the kingdom and start a new life out on his own. He told him to leave at once before his brothers woke up and discovered he had a sack of gold. and plotted to rob him. The youngest son departed as the king commanded, and hours passed before the other two boys woke up. When at last they were up and alert, the king told them that his time had come, and he had one commandment they must obey, or else the kingdom would be lost forever. He gave them each their sack of gold and said, "You must take very serious care and discretion as you go forth into the village, and find those who are truly the most needy and deserving of aid. For understand, boys, this is your one and only chance to gain the mercy and confidence of this kingdom. Otherwise, you will be in dire peril when I pass away. One more thing," he said, "go in opposite directions. So if one of you gets robbed, not all of the gold is gone at once." So the first son departed to the east side of the village, and the second to the west. As the first son entered the village, he diverted his eyes from the sight of the peasants, and was too leery to even bid good day to one of them. As he became fearful, this caused the townfolk to look his way at his awkward behavior, which worsened as his fear worsened, and he sped up his pace to get past the villagers before anyone could even speak to him. But a wealthy, mischievous man recognized him to be the king's son. As was his nature, he jumped at an opportunity to perhaps swindle the foolish young man. He stepped in front of the son smoothly and cheerfully bid him good day. In his fine clothes and gentlemanly manner, he disarmed the first son, and the king's son replied good day back. "You look as though you're dealing with a predicament, and I would consider it an honor and a privilege to assist you if I can, if you care to share your dilemma with a fellow gentleman." The first son was so relieved to be speaking with someone of his social rank that he disclosed his whole mission, explaining, "I have no idea which of these peasants, if any of them, is worthy of anything. Dear boy, it is so fortunate we have crossed paths, for I have the resolute solution to not only your problem, but your father's as well. It so happens that I have access to a miracle elixir that will save your father's life." The king's son said, "I have this much gold, is it enough?" The man lifted the sack up and said, "Usually no, but for you, dear boy, I will make an exception. Now just wait right here, and I'll be back shortly." The man then proceeded to hurry home, jump in his wagon, and head out of town for a nice long luxury vacation. Meanwhile, on the west side of the village, the second son had been equally unable to bring himself down to the level of the common folk, and was ultimately also confronted by a tidy, upright, proper-speaking gent who asked about his purpose for walking around looking so worried. He explained eagerly, and grateful to be speaking to someone of high enough intellect that it was worth spending his breath upon the conversation. After he'd said all he had to say and explained everything and his mission, the man spoke up. "Dear boy, that indeed is a dilemma, but I, good man, am an associate to the clergy of the church, and therefore I can not only sway the village to your favor and assure you protection from a revolt, but I can see to it that your father gets right into those pearly gates, VIP entrance, if you can make an appropriate donation." The second son presented his bag of loot. The man said, "Well, maybe not the VIP section, but we'll see he gets taken care of." "Great! Can you come back to the castle and tell my father the good news?" "Oh, dear boy, it's not I that will accompany you to the castle, but the chief holy man himself. Just wait right here, and I'll bring him to you in a jiffy." Then he too went home to prepare for a nice trip to tropical paradise. Meanwhile, the third son was approaching a different village 13 miles away. He too had been accosted by scoundrels out to swindle his loot along the roadway, but he was not so foolish, for he knew this gold would have to get him room and board for as long as it would take before he could find a profession. Now there was enough gold in the sack to buy a house, a horse, and a year's worth of food, as it had the same amount of value as the bags of gold his brothers had. But as he came to the edge of town, he discovered a dead man laying beside the road, with an empty beggar's cup in front of him. He was startled, and as uncomfortable as it was to remain beside the corpse, he waited to see if he could flag down a passerby to alert them of the dead body. In only a minute or two, a coach came by. He began flapping his arms to get their attention. "What is it, lad? Be quick about it," the driver demanded, bothered to have been stopped. He said, "This body needs moved." "Moved to where?" "Well, wherever is not laying beside the road." The man laughed. "Not by me, it doesn't. Good luck with your dead weight there, lad." The next couple coaches didn't even bother to stop. Unlike his brothers, this third son didn't dress in fancy clothes. Plus, he'd managed to accumulate some dust by this point in the day, so he wasn't looking much different than the beggar himself. He had his gold sack wrapped up in a jacket so it wouldn't make him look like a target, and he tucked it under his arm and headed into town to tell the authorities. First, he went to the police. The police explained they were not in the business of serving and protecting the living. The dead were not under their obligation, although they still reserved some authority if the dead were to get unruly or present a nuisance, but added, if he stays to the side of the road and outside the village, he shouldn't be a problem. "So who can help me then?" the third son asked. "Help you what?" "Do something about the dead guy." So the policeman directed him to the funeral home. He was greeted at the door of the funeral home by a somber man with an upturned nose who gave a look to let it be known that there better be a good explanation from the dusty traveler to have come knocking. The third son informed them of the dead body. "And what relation are you to the deceased?" the man asked. "No relation. I just found him." "Well then, boy, how do you know he's lost? Maybe someone left him there on purpose." The boy rolled his eyes and said, "Well, if they did, they're criminals. Will you please do right and assist me in taking care of this body?" "Young man, at what time, location, and by whom was this man pronounced dead?" "Well, he's been dead long enough that he's begun to gather flies, but as far as I know, I'm the only person who's paid any attention." "Well then, young man, it sounds like first he needs to be seen by a doctor. But the doctor doesn't do home visits, and your friend better have insurance or he probably won't get penciled in for an in-office visit either." The third son removed the jacket from under his arm and pulled out the gold sack and said, "I will pay to get this taken care of." At this, the funeral director's eyes lit up and said, "Well, then, good boy, why didn't you say so? Follow me to my coach. We've got a funeral to attend." He first rode back to the police station and talked to the policeman privately away from this boy. The policeman got in the separate wagon and followed behind as they went to get the doctor. The funeral director and the policeman both went into the doctor's office while the king's son waited outside, and soon they were rolling again, now with 3 wagons in a row. Realizing they still weren't headed back towards the body, the young man asked, "Where are we going now?" "We have to go speak to the banker about a burial plot." "You got to be able to buy a burial plot. There needs to be a burial plot." So after another stop at the bank, now the funeral director, the doctor, the policeman, and the banker were all wagoned up. "Now are we headed to go do something about this poor beggar's remains?" "Well, young man, unless you can dig with your hands, I think you're going to need to swing by the hardware store to get a shovel." As they pulled in front of the hardware store, the funeral director hurried in first to talk to the clerk. The third son found a spade and approached the counter. The price said 1 gold coin, so he dug 1 coin out of the sack. "That's a gardening spade, dear boy. It's not authorized for use on the dearly departed." "Give me a break, it's fine." "It's flat out disrespectful. Just do what's right, young man. Mind yourself and be patient, and we will guide you through this process correctly." The hardware store owner proceeded to point to the spade, and then he painted it silver, and then charged the third son 5 gold coins. "Now are we ready?" he demanded. "Only if you and your departed friend are ungodly men with no regards for the human soul." The young man was too fed up to even roll his eyes in protest, so they went and picked up the preacher. The third son looked around at the funeral director, the cop, the doctor, the banker, and now the preacher, but he was wondering why the hardware store guy came along too. So he asked him, "Are you just coming out of boredom or curiosity?" I'm coming because you've got my one and only burial spade, and it's going to be in use. You mean my burial spade? I bought it for 5 gold coins. You wish that was a renter's fee. And the whole digging fee? The king's son asked in hopes that the hardware store guy was planning on doing this digging. No, just renter's fee. You get to dig for free, providing you don't chip any of that silver paint off, or else there will be an added fee. Alas, the wagon train rolled up to the now stinking corpse. The third son unloaded from the funeral director's wagon. Everyone else stayed put. So is anyone going to help me load him? Load him? For God's sakes, he's not getting into any of these wagons, they declared. Well, where's this burial plot I'm buying? The banker held out a notepad and was jotting something down and said, right there will do. I'm drafting the deed right now. They tossed him the spade. The preacher said a prayer for the third son to be forgiven for associating with dead beggars. The policeman ordered him to stop digging because it was time for everyone to go home for dinner. The funeral director tossed him 2 sticks and a string and said, make your friend a grave marker, and proceeded to add that to the bill. And finally, after rolling the corpse into the hole and covering it up, the funeral director said, that's a wrap, gentlemen. Well, young man, hand it over. How much? He asked, reaching in for a sack of gold. How much? For 5 wagon rides, funeral service, burial plot, grave marker, funeral spade rental, and a fee for chipping the silver paint, a donation to the church, and a citation for not digging that hole deep enough. The third son knew that they were just going to take it all, and he just tossed him the sack. He began walking back towards his father's kingdom. This ordeal had made him think about his father, and he couldn't stand not being there for him as he died. He couldn't let him die alone like that poor beggar had. A wagon blew by him, kicking up dust, but it stopped up ahead. And the man yelled back to the boy, you need a lift? The third son jogged up to the wagon and hopped in gratefully. The old man said, funny thing, I don't know why I was compelled to stop. I've never picked up a stranger in my life. Well then, the wagon's driver took off, and as he reached his homestead, the son unloaded, and no sooner did he start walking till another coach stopped and picked him up. In no time at all, he was all the way back to his father's castle, and just in time. There by his father's bed were his 2 gullible sons who'd come home and had to tell their father that they'd been conned out of all their gold. He thought to himself that he too had been suckered, and was thinking about how he was going to explain that to his father. But before he could speak, death showed up. The king, with weary eyes, surrounded by his 3 sons who'd all failed to carry out his command, and was there with death, and 2 doors opened, mystical doors. One said to the good place, and the other said the bad. The angel of death said nothing, but the king thought to himself, the bad. And that door swung open. His ghost arose from his body, and in his last gasping breath, and with head hung low, he walked towards his bad fate. Suddenly, a 3rd door swung open in between the 2, and the ghost of the beggar popped into the room and said, whoa, your highness, not so fast. Even death looked shocked. The beggar explained, it was your wish for one of your boys to learn that kindness, compassion, and generosity is the foundation of leadership and any kingdom that deserves to last. And behold, your son has triumphed. The 2 older boys looked at each other in confusion. Now Death, who had never spoke until this very moment, burst forth in protest. But he didn't do any deed for the living. He spent his gold to bury a dead beggar. Behind the center door, behind the beggar, a whole crowd of voices began grumbling, angered by what the angel of death had said. 2 more living strangers burst into the room in a frenzy, saying, we've been moved by spirits demanding that we come here and bring gifts to the king. The angel of death, now embittered, said, there is no king here. The king is dead, and his sons are failures. The beggar declared, well, I have a whole kingdom of souls behind me that beg to differ, Angel. So unless you're as crooked as some of these money-grubbing snakes in this living realm, you need to respect the king and his sons and respect that they have triumphed. And all truth seekers know that good deeds and kindness bridge over the bad realm, even in death. The angel of death began to throw a little hissy fit, saying, But, his kindness was to someone who was already dead. The beggar declared, kindness begets kings, and this king begat a doer of kindness. The Father and the Son have triumphed over you, death. Death shouted, there is no way I will open the door to the good place for this man. The condition of that was that one of his sons must be fit to reign. Once again, the crowd behind the center door got louder, and they started chanting, long be the king, long be the king. The angel of death, in despair, said, fine then. If the boy has proven himself to be a king to a bunch of angry dead, then let him go there and be their king. That is the only way that his father can enter the good place. The ghost of the father looked to his son and said to the angel of death, nay, for my son has a life yet to live. And if it's the door you tend to as the good place is operated by someone who would take away my son's life because you're a sore loser, I don't care to go there anyway. Fine then, the angel of death shouted, then go to the bad place. And that door opened, but then suddenly closed with a thud, for an arrow had struck the door shut. Then another arrow struck the knob and knocked it off. It was fired by one of the two strangers who'd been brought to the castle under the compulsion of spirits to bring gifts. The man rushed to the king and handed him a bow and a bundle of arrows. A gift to you, your highness. It hits whatever it's aimed at. Immediately after, the second stranger presented a flute to the ghost of the king and said, whenever it's played, it always makes new music, even out of old songs. It has the power to make anyone dance. Behind the beggar, from the center door, the crowd chanted, yet louder, long be the king, long be the king. The king looked at the beggar with a look of acknowledgement as he put the flute in with a bundle of arrows and put the bundle and the arrows and the bow over his shoulder. Your kingdom awaits you, your highness, the beggar said. The center door swung wide open as 40,000 joyous souls cheered, long be the king. The beggar declared, behold the grateful dead, a kingdom devoted to assist the living to bridge across bad places. The king and the beggar stepped through the door, and with the roar of joyous army of souls, the door shut behind them. The two gift-bearing strangers had already departed without even a goodbye. All that was left in the room was the angel of death and the three sons. Death was pacing around, having trouble dealing with the fact he was going to leave this realm of the living without his catch. He snorted quietly as he turned the knob of the door. Stupidest crap I ever saw. But as the doorknob twisted on the good door, the bad door opened instead. And a force like suction or gravity began drawing him towards the bad door. He was whimpering and struggling to try and get free from the force. Now the three sons were not affected by the supernatural force of gravity. It apparently only pertained to paranormal entities. As the angel of death whimpered and struggled towards the bad place, the oldest son said, is he crying? The middle son laughed. Oh my God, he is crying. Death, now embarrassed with a tear on his cheek, shot the boys one last pitiful look, hoping for sympathy, and then was sucked away to the bad place. And so it was, the three sons were left to try and handle the kingdom without their pop. They had fortunately learned a lot of lessons that should help them do right. Nonetheless, they're going to need all the help they can get from the Grateful Dead. So that's the tale of the Grateful Dead. Glad you made it. Hope you have a good one. Good stuff, good things, good places, and good night.